The world will always fear what it refuses to understand, but sometimes all it takes is one gentle hand to change a destiny. Thick gray clouds rolled over Black Hollow Forest as Emily Carter carefully followed the narrow trail that wound between towering pine trees, her woven basket resting against her hip with every measured step. The cool autumn air carried the familiar scent of damp earth, cedar and wild herbs, making the forest feel more like home than the village she had known her entire life. Most people believed the woods had become dangerous during the past month. Hunters whispered about a massive black wolf roaming the hills, frightening livestock and leaving deep paw prints larger than any ordinary animal could make. Mothers hurried their children indoors before sunset, merchants avoided the forest roads altogether, and every conversation eventually ended with the same warning. If you saw the wolf, you turned around and ran. Emily had listened to those stories for weeks, yet none of them matched the quiet rhythm of the forest she knew so well. Birds still sang from the branches. Deer still wandered through the ferns. Streams still flowed peacefully over smooth stones. Fear had changed the people far more than it had changed the woods. She knelt beside a patch of moonroot blooming beneath an ancient oak and carefully gathered several pale leaves into her basket before a sudden chorus of frightened birds burst into the sky. Hundreds of wings lifted at once, scattering across the treetops in complete silence only seconds later. Emily slowly stood. She had spent enough years gathering herbs to recognize when the forest itself was trying to say something. A low growl drifted between the trees, deep enough to vibrate through the ground beneath her boots. It did not sound angry. It sounded exhausted. She quietly followed the sound until the forest opened into a rocky clearing surrounded by moss-covered boulders. There, lying beside a fallen cedar, was the largest wolf she had ever seen. Its midnight black fur was matted from days of rain, its breathing slow and uneven, and its silver eyes watched every movement with fierce determination despite obvious fatigue. Several broken branches surrounded the place where it had apparently struggled to stand before finally giving up. The moment Emily stepped into the clearing, the wolf lifted its head and released another warning growl. Even while lying down, it looked powerful enough to send anyone running. Emily remained perfectly still. She neither backed away nor moved closer. Instead, she gently lowered the basket onto the ground and spoke in the same calm voice she used whenever she rescued frightened animals. "You have every reason not to trust people," she whispered. "But I am not here to hurt you." The wolf continued watching her without blinking, its silver eyes reflecting the pale afternoon light like polished glass. Minutes passed with neither of them moving. Finally, Emily noticed something everyone else must have missed. The great animal was not guarding territory. It was simply too weak to leave. The realization quietly erased the last trace of fear from her heart. She took one careful step forward, then another. The wolf growled again, louder this time, but there was no strength behind the warning. Emily slowly removed her cloak and spread it across the damp ground a few feet away. "You do not have to come," she said softly. "But you should not stay here alone." The breeze stirred the tall grass between them while sunlight briefly broke through the clouds, illuminating the wolf's silver eyes with an almost human intelligence. After one long, silent moment, the enormous wolf struggled to its feet, staggered only a single step, then stopped beside the cloak without taking its eyes off Emily. She offered the smallest smile. "Come home with me," she whispered. "Just until you remember that not every door is closed." High above the clearing, hidden among the ancient branches, an unseen figure watched the impossible scene unfold before disappearing deeper into the forest without making a single sound. Emily Carter walked slowly along the narrow forest path, never rushing the enormous wolf that followed several feet behind her. She resisted the urge to glance back every few seconds, trusting that if the animal chose to leave, it would. The afternoon sun drifted lower through the tall pines, casting long golden beams across the trail as fallen leaves crunched softly beneath their feet. Every now and then the wolf paused, lifting its head to study distant sounds hidden deep within the woods, but each time Emily continued walking without fear, and after a brief hesitation, the great creature quietly resumed following her. By the time the roof of her little wooden cottage appeared beyond the trees, the sky had turned a warm shade of amber. Emily opened the simple gate and stepped into the small garden filled with lavender, rosemary, moonroot, and wildflowers. She placed her basket beside the porch before turning toward the wolf. It remained just outside the fence, watching the cottage with obvious caution. You have probably never been invited anywhere before, she said with a gentle smile. Neither have I very often. The wolf tilted its head slightly but refused to cross the gate. Emily disappeared inside for only a minute before returning with a wooden bowl filled with fresh water, and another carrying warm stew that had been simmering over the fireplace since morning. She placed both bowls on the ground inside the garden before quietly stepping back onto the porch. No one will bother you here, she whispered. You can decide when you are ready. Several long moments passed before the wolf finally entered the yard with slow, careful steps. Even now it moved with quiet dignity despite its obvious exhaustion. It lowered its head, drank deeply from the bowl, then cautiously tasted the food without ever taking its silver eyes away from Emily. She smiled softly and busied herself trimming fresh herbs near the porch, pretending not to notice every cautious movement it made. As evening settled across Black Hollow Forest, a cool breeze carried the scent of pine through the garden. Emily prepared fresh linen, warm water, and a jar of herbal salve before sitting quietly on the porch steps. Your shoulder still needs attention, she said gently. But I will wait until you trust me. The wolf remained motionless beneath the old maple tree for several minutes. Finally, to Emily's surprise, it slowly rose and limped toward her on its own. It stopped only an arm's length away before lowering itself onto the grass with a quiet sigh that sounded less like surrender and more like acceptance. Emily carefully cleaned the scrape along its shoulder with slow, steady hands, speaking softly the entire time about ordinary things, the changing seasons, the vegetables she hoped to plant next spring, and the bluebirds that always nested beneath the cottage roof. The wolf never growled. Instead, it listened in complete silence, its fierce expression gradually softening each time she spoke. When the fresh bandage was finally secured, Emily leaned back with a satisfied smile. There, she said. That looks much better. The wolf lifted its head and looked directly into her eyes. For the briefest moment, Emily could have sworn she saw gratitude hidden behind that calm silver gaze. Later that night, after the lanterns had been extinguished and the cottage had fallen silent, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows. Emily woke just enough to hear quiet footsteps circling outside before everything became still again. At sunrise she opened the front door expecting to find the wolf gone, but instead she discovered it lying peacefully across the porch, facing the forest as though it had spent the entire night standing guard over a home that had only just become its own. The following days settled into a quiet rhythm that neither Emily Carter nor the mysterious wolf had ever expected. Every morning she opened the cottage door to find the great black animal waiting somewhere nearby, sometimes resting beneath the old maple tree, sometimes sitting at the edge of the herb garden with its silver eyes calmly following her every movement. It never wandered far, yet it never behaved like a pet either. It carried itself with quiet dignity, as though choosing to remain rather than needing to. Emily never questioned that choice. She simply accepted it with the same kindness she offered every living creature that crossed her path. As autumn slowly painted the forest in deeper shades of gold and crimson, neighbors passing along the distant road occasionally caught glimpses of the enormous wolf resting near the cottage. Rumors spread quickly through the village. Some believed Emily had lost all common sense. Others whispered that the beast had bewitched her. A few even offered to gather hunters willing to chase it away. Emily politely thanked them for their concern before declining every offer. He has never harmed anyone here, she would answer gently. Fear is not always the same thing as danger. Most people walked away unconvinced, but none dared step close enough to challenge the wolf themselves. The strange companion seemed to understand every conversation. Whenever visitors approached the cottage, it quietly moved to a shaded place beneath the trees, watching without threatening anyone. Once the visitors left, it calmly returned to the porch as though resuming an unfinished conversation with the peaceful little home. Emily gradually noticed other unusual things as well. One chilly morning she awoke to discover fresh firewood neatly stacked beside the cottage, even though she clearly remembered leaving the pile unfinished the evening before. Another afternoon a heavy basket slipped from the porch railing while she was hanging herbs to dry. Yet before it struck the ground, the wolf nudged it gently aside with surprising precision, preventing every carefully gathered plant from spilling into the mud. You really are far too clever, Emily said with a quiet laugh. The wolf merely looked away, pretending complete innocence, although the faintest softness seemed to flicker through its usually guarded expression. That evening Emily carried a warm blanket onto the porch as the temperature dropped with the arrival of another cool mountain breeze. "Winter will be here before long," she whispered while placing the blanket beside the doorway. "You probably will not use this, but I thought I should offer anyway." The wolf studied the folded blanket for several long moments before settling beside it instead of directly on top of it, almost as though accepting the gesture mattered more than accepting the comfort itself. Emily smiled, finding the small act strangely endearing. Early the next morning she gathered her basket and walked toward the forest to collect fresh herbs before sunrise. The wolf followed at its usual distance until they reached a crystal-clear stream winding through ancient stones. There, without warning, the animal suddenly stopped walking. Emily turned, expecting another quiet stare, but the wolf was no longer looking at her. Its attention had shifted toward the opposite side of the stream where a tall man dressed in a dark traveling cloak stood partially hidden between the trees. His posture was calm, his face remained shadowed beneath the hood, and the morning mist drifted silently around him. Before Emily could call out or ask whether he needed help, the stranger slowly lifted his head. Even from across the water, she caught a brief glimpse of unmistakable silver eyes, exactly the same color as those of the wolf standing only a few feet behind her, and by the time she looked back toward her unusual companion, the place where the great black wolf had been standing was suddenly empty. Emily Carter stood frozen beside the quiet stream, her basket of freshly gathered herbs hanging forgotten at her side as the cool morning mist drifted gently between the ancient pines. She looked toward the place where the great black wolf had stood only moments before, but the damp earth beside the water was empty. Slowly, almost unwillingly, she turned her attention back to the mysterious traveler waiting across the stream. He remained perfectly still, his dark cloak stirring lightly in the breeze while those remarkable silver eyes rested upon her with calm familiarity instead of surprise. Emily could not explain why her heart suddenly felt strangely peaceful. She had never seen the man before, yet something about him seemed impossibly familiar, like remembering a dream that had quietly followed her into daylight. The stranger stepped carefully across the smooth stones crossing the stream until he stood only a few feet away. His movements carried effortless confidence, but there was no arrogance in them. Instead, he regarded Emily with quiet gratitude, as though searching for words that had taken far too long to find. "You are wondering where the wolf went," he said gently. Emily nodded before answering with complete honesty. "He has never disappeared without letting me see him leave." The man smiled faintly. "He trusted you enough to stay." Emily studied his face more closely. The silver eyes, the calm expression, even the subtle way he tilted his head while listening reminded her of the wolf waiting faithfully outside her cottage each morning. The realization lingered just beyond her understanding, refusing to become clear. "Have we met before?" she asked. For a brief moment, the stranger looked toward the flowing stream instead of answering. "In a way," he replied quietly, "although not like this." Before Emily could ask another question, the distant sound of approaching horses echoed through the forest. Birds lifted from nearby branches as several riders emerged between the towering pines wearing dark cloaks fastened with polished silver clasps. The moment they reached the clearing, every rider dismounted and respectfully lowered their heads toward the mysterious traveler. Emily watched in stunned silence as one of the men stepped forward and spoke with unmistakable reverence. "Your Majesty, the council has been searching for you since dawn." The words seemed to freeze the entire forest. Emily slowly looked back at the traveler. He offered an almost apologetic smile before lowering his hood completely, revealing a handsome face framed by dark shoulder-length hair. There was no mistaking the quiet authority surrounding him now. "My name is Adrian Blackwood," he said. "I am the Alpha King." Emily instinctively lowered her gaze in surprise, then quickly looked back up, still struggling to connect the humble stranger before her with the ruler of the Northern Territories. "Your Majesty," she whispered. "I did not realize." Adrian gently shook his head. "You were never meant to." His silver eyes softened with unmistakable warmth. "You welcomed someone the entire kingdom feared without asking for a name, a title, or a reward." Emily remained silent, remembering every quiet evening beside the cottage, every careful bandage, every conversation she had shared with the lonely wolf beneath the maple tree. Adrian stepped one pace closer, careful not to overwhelm her. There is something I have owed you. Since the day you opened your gate. He paused, meeting her eyes with complete sincerity before speaking the words that quietly changed everything she believed she understood. The wolf you brought home was never simply under my protection. His gentle smile returned as the morning sunlight reflected within those familiar silver eyes. Emily. That wolf was me. Emily Carter could only stare at Adrian Blackwood as the quiet rush of the stream filled the silence between them. Every memory from the past several days returned with astonishing clarity. The silver eyes that had watched her from beneath the old maple tree, the unusual intelligence hidden behind every cautious glance, the quiet patience while she changed the bandage on his shoulder, and the strange feeling that she had never truly been alone. None of those moments seemed impossible anymore. They suddenly fit together with perfect, almost unsettling logic. Emily lowered her voice, afraid that speaking too loudly might somehow shatter the fragile truth standing before her. It was really you every morning outside my cottage? Adrian nodded once. Every morning. You listened while I talked about my garden. I remember every word. Emily let out a quiet breath before an unexpected smile appeared. You pretended not to enjoy my stew. A faint trace of amusement reached Adrian's eyes. I was trying to protect what little dignity I still had. Even several royal guards exchanged discreet smiles without breaking their respectful composure. Emily looked toward the flowing stream, shaking her head in disbelief. I thought you simply understood people better than any animal I had ever met. Adrian answered gently. I understood one person better than I expected. His words carried no arrogance, only gratitude. After a thoughtful pause, he continued. There are ancient gifts carried within my bloodline. During certain moments, especially after great exhaustion, I cannot always choose which form I keep. That morning in the forest, I had wandered farther than I realized. By the time you found me, I no longer possessed the strength to return home. Emily remembered the fear everyone in the village had spoken with whenever the black wolf was mentioned. Everyone believed you were dangerous. Adrian looked toward the towering pines where sunlight filtered softly through the branches. Sometimes people fear what they do not understand. Sometimes they fear stories more than truth. Emily smiled gently. You certainly tried very hard to look frightening. Did it work? He asked. She laughed quietly. Not after you accepted a blanket without lying on it. For the first time, Adrian laughed as well, the warm sound surprising even the guards who had likely grown accustomed to seeing only the calm, disciplined ruler of the kingdom. When the laughter faded, Adrian's expression became more thoughtful. There is something else you deserve to know. Emily listened carefully. The elders have long believed that true bonds are never formed through power alone. They begin with a choice freely given, especially when there is nothing to gain. Emily frowned slightly. I only helped someone who needed help. Adrian met her eyes with complete sincerity. Exactly. You never asked who I was. You never sought favor from the throne. You saw only someone who had been abandoned. Emily looked down at her hands for a quiet moment. No one should be left alone simply because others are afraid. The morning breeze gently stirred the trees as Adrian reached into the inner pocket of his cloak and carefully removed an elegant silver pendant bearing the ancient crest of the royal house. At its center rested a polished moonstone that shimmered softly beneath the sunlight. Before he could explain its meaning, the stone unexpectedly began glowing with a gentle silver light. Emily instinctively touched the simple wooden pendant she always wore beneath her dress, a keepsake carved years earlier by her late father. To her astonishment, it answered with the same quiet glow. Neither she nor Adrian moved. The royal guards exchanged startled glances, while the oldest among them slowly lowered his head in silent recognition. Adrian looked at the matching light with unmistakable wonder before raising his eyes to Emily once again. It seems, he said softly, the bond between us began long before either of us ever understood why fate led you to that lonely clearing in Black Hollow Forest. The silver light faded as quietly as it had appeared, leaving only the gentle murmur of the stream and the astonished silence surrounding Emily Carter and Adrian Blackwood. Neither of them reached for another explanation. Some moments carried their own truth without demanding immediate answers. Emily slowly lowered her hand from the wooden pendant resting against her heart, still feeling the faint warmth that lingered within the smooth carved surface. My father made this for me before I was old enough to remember, she said softly. He always told me it would guide me whenever I felt lost, but he never explained why. Adrian looked thoughtfully at the simple pendant before returning his gaze to the glowing royal crest in his own hand. The oldest records speak of symbols that awaken only when two paths meant to cross finally meet. Most people believe those stories disappeared centuries ago. Emily smiled gently. Perhaps they were only waiting for someone to believe them again. The oldest royal guard stepped forward with quiet respect, his weathered face carrying the calm wisdom of many years. Your Majesty, he said carefully, the High Council should be informed about what has happened today. Adrian considered the suggestion before slowly shaking his head. Not yet. The guard lowered his head in understanding. As you wish. Emily looked between them with mild curiosity. Would telling them cause trouble? Adrian answered honestly. Not everyone welcomes change, especially when it arrives in a form they never expected. Emily nodded quietly. She understood those words better than he realized. She had spent most of her life watching people judge others before learning who they truly were. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh water across the clearing as the group began walking back toward the forest trail. Adrian matched his pace to Emily's without either of them mentioning it. The royal guards respectfully remained several steps behind, allowing an unexpected feeling of ordinary conversation to replace royal ceremony. I have been thinking about something, Emily said after several minutes. Adrian glanced toward her. What is that? When everyone else feared the wolf, why did you stay near my cottage instead of returning directly to the palace? Adrian smiled quietly. Because for the first time in many years, I found a place where no one expected me to be a king. Emily laughed softly. You were still rather stubborn. I was trying to recover what remained of my pride. You also refused to sleep inside. That was because I did not wish to frighten you. Emily looked at him with amused disbelief. You guarded my porch every night. Adrian answered with complete sincerity. That felt different. The warmth in his voice made Emily smile without realizing it. By the time they reached the edge of the forest, the familiar roof of her cottage appeared between the trees, surrounded by the little herb garden glowing beneath the afternoon sun. Everything looked exactly as she had left it, peaceful and welcoming. Yet something felt different. A pair of blue jays that usually greeted her return sat unusually still upon the fence instead of singing. Emily paused. They never become this quiet unless strangers have been nearby. Adrian immediately noticed the same unusual silence spreading through the garden. There were no broken branches, no obvious signs of disturbance, only an almost invisible footprint pressed into the soft soil beside the wooden gate where none should have been. He exchanged a brief glance with the oldest guard, who quietly examined the ground before looking back with calm concern. Someone visited while we were away, the guard said. Adrian's expression remained composed, but his silver eyes sharpened with thoughtful focus. Emily rested one hand against the garden gate, realizing that whatever peaceful future had quietly begun beside her little cottage was no longer known only to the two of them, and somewhere beyond the quiet trees, another unseen observer had already started following the same invisible bond that fate had finally chosen to reveal. Evening settled gently over Black Hollow Forest as the soft silver glow from the two pendants slowly faded, leaving behind a quiet stillness that felt less like an ending and more like the beginning of something neither Emily Carter nor Adrian Blackwood could fully explain. The little cottage seemed warmer than ever before, its lanterns casting golden light across the wooden walls while the fragrance of fresh herbs drifted through the open window. Outside, the royal guards respectfully remained near the garden, speaking in low voices that never disturbed the peaceful atmosphere surrounding the home. Emily carefully placed her father's carved pendant back around her neck before looking toward Adrian with thoughtful curiosity. What happens now? She asked. Adrian remained silent for a moment, studying the small cottage that had become unexpectedly important to him. Now, he answered quietly, we choose what comes next instead of allowing fear to choose for us. Emily smiled softly. That sounds much simpler than I imagine it truly is. Adrian nodded with a gentle laugh. It usually is. Before either of them could continue, the oldest royal guard approached the doorway carrying a sealed parchment marked with the crest of the High Council. He offered it respectfully to Adrian. Your Majesty, this was delivered by royal messenger only moments ago. Adrian accepted the letter, breaking the wax seal without changing his calm expression. His eyes carefully moved across the handwritten lines before he slowly folded the parchment once more. Emily noticed the thoughtful look on his face. Is everything all right? Adrian looked toward her with complete honesty. The council has learned that something extraordinary occurred today. Emily lowered her eyes briefly. About the pendants? Yes. He nodded. Word travels more quickly than any of us would prefer. Emily expected concern, yet Adrian seemed remarkably calm. Will they object? She asked. Some will. His voice remained steady. Others will simply want answers. Emily walked toward the cottage window where moonlight now rested across the peaceful herb garden. I have never spoken before a council. Adrian joined her beside the window. You should not have to become someone different simply because you stand before important people. Emily glanced at him with a quiet smile. That is easy for a king to say. Adrian shook his head gently. It is precisely because I am king that I know how easily titles can distract people from character. Emily looked outside where the blue jays had returned to the fence, peacefully settling beneath the evening sky. If they ask why I brought home a wolf everyone feared, she said softly, I only have one answer. Adrian waited patiently. He looked lonely. The Alpha King smiled with unmistakable warmth. And that answer may be wiser than every speech prepared inside the royal palace. The oldest guard quietly looked toward the moonlit garden before speaking once more. Your Majesty, the carriage is ready whenever you wish to depart. Adrian nodded but made no immediate move toward the door. Instead he turned back to Emily. Tomorrow I will appear before the High Council. Emily listened carefully. And I would like you to stand beside me. She looked genuinely surprised. Beside you? Adrian answered without hesitation. Not because of a title. Because when the entire kingdom saw only a dangerous wolf, you saw someone worthy of compassion. That is the truth I intend to protect. Emily felt the simple words settle deeply within her heart. Outside, the moon rose higher above Black Hollow Forest, bathing the little cottage in gentle silver light, while the peaceful garden swayed beneath the cool evening breeze. Far beyond the distant hills, the lights of the royal capital shimmered beneath the same sky, waiting for a meeting that would quietly remind an entire kingdom that the strongest bonds were never forged by crowns, power, or fear, but by one simple act of kindness offered to someone everyone else had chosen to leave behind. The following morning dawned beneath a brilliant blue sky as Emily Carter traveled with Adrian Blackwood toward the royal capital, watching golden fields and quiet villages pass beyond the carriage window, while wondering how a single act of kindness had changed the direction of her entire life. When they finally entered the Grand Council Hall, sunlight poured through towering stained glass windows, filling the chamber with soft colors that danced across polished stone floors. Members of the High Council stood waiting in respectful silence, their expressions reflecting equal parts curiosity and uncertainty. Emily felt countless eyes turn toward her, yet Adrian remained beside her exactly as he had promised. He did not walk ahead as a king expecting obedience. He matched her pace as someone honoring the courage that had first welcomed him when he had possessed neither crown nor title in her eyes. One elder slowly stepped forward and looked toward Emily with calm interest. Is it true, he asked gently, that you brought home the wolf everyone else feared? Emily answered without hesitation. Yes. Another elder continued. Did you know who he truly was? She shook her head. No. Then why did you help him? The enormous chamber fell completely silent. Emily looked briefly toward Adrian before answering with the same quiet honesty that had guided every choice she had made since entering Black Hollow Forest. Because he was alone. No complicated speech followed those simple words. None was needed. The council members exchanged thoughtful glances as the oldest among them slowly smiled. Sometimes, the elder said softly, the simplest answers reveal the deepest wisdom. Adrian stepped forward only after Emily had finished speaking. Many believe strength belonged only to those who carried power, he said, his calm voice filling the chamber. Yet when I wore neither crown nor royal cloak, only one person chose compassion instead of fear. If this kingdom wishes to honor true character, it begins here. He gently turned toward Emily before continuing. The bond revealed between us did not appear because of status. It awakened because kindness was freely given when nothing could be gained in return. The chamber remained quiet for another long moment before the oldest elder respectfully lowered his head toward Emily. One by one, every remaining council member followed. No proclamation was necessary. Their simple gesture carried greater meaning than any ceremony could have offered. As the meeting concluded, Adrian and Emily stepped outside onto the palace terrace overlooking the forest stretching toward the distant mountains where their extraordinary journey had first begun. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine through the afternoon air, reminding Emily of the little cottage waiting peacefully at the edge of Black Hollow Forest. Adrian rested his hands upon the stone railing, looking toward the distant tree line with a quiet smile. "Do you miss your garden already?" he asked. Emily laughed softly. "Every hour." Adrian smiled. "Then we should not keep it waiting." Several days later, beneath the gentle glow of another rising moon, they stood once again outside the familiar wooden cottage surrounded by blooming herbs and singing blue jays. The world around them looked almost exactly as it had before, yet everything had quietly changed. Emily looked toward Adrian with warm amusement. "You know," she said, "you still chose the porch instead of the guest room." Adrian laughed, the sound carrying across the peaceful meadow. "Old habits are difficult to abandon." Together they watched the moon rise above Black Hollow Forest, knowing that the greatest bond of all had never been created by ancient magic alone. It had begun the moment one compassionate heart refused to leave a frightened soul behind. And from that day forward, every traveler who passed the little cottage carried home the same quiet lesson, that true strength is gentle, true loyalty is earned through kindness, and sometimes the path to a kingdom begins with opening the front door to someone everyone else was afraid to welcome.